You stink! Get out of my section!
The man was black, hoodie, headphones. He looked up calmly.
Ma'am, this is my assigned seat.
I said get out! Don't you dare talk to me. Don't even breathe near me. Animals belong in cargo, not up here.
She snatched her Chanel bag and slammed it onto his seat. Then she drove her Louboutin heel into his armrest like a stake.
I said move! Are you deaf and disgusting?
He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her and smiled, quietly, patiently. That smile would cost this woman her husband's career, her mansion, her reputation, and every dollar to her name. Let me take you back to the beginning. 5:45 in the morning, Chicago. A penthouse suite at the Peninsula Hotel, 42 floors above the frozen city. Brandon Moore was already awake. The treadmill hummed beneath his feet. Bloomberg played on the wall, muted, just the ticker scrolling. His breathing was steady, controlled, the kind of rhythm that comes from a man who's been disciplined his whole life. No gold chains, no Rolex, no designer anything. Just a faded Howard University hoodie, gray sweatpants, and a pair of beat-up running shoes that should have been thrown out 2 years ago. Brandon stepped off the treadmill at 6 sharp. He wiped his face with a hotel towel, walked to the kitchen island, and ate a bowl of plain oatmeal standing up. His phone, cracked screen, no case, buzzed with emails, 12 unread from overnight, all marked urgent. He scrolled through them like a man reading the morning weather. Here's what you need to understand about Brandon Moore. He was 43 years old, self-made, no inheritance, no family money. He grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Southeast D.C. with a single mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry. He got a full scholarship to Howard, then Harvard Business School, then Wall Street. By 35, he'd built a private equity firm that quietly acquired controlling stakes in Fortune 500 companies. No press conferences, no magazine covers, no flashy Instagram. Brandon didn't believe in noise. He believed in ownership. And his biggest piece of ownership? Pinnacle Brands International, a luxury consumer goods empire worth $4.8 billion. Perfume, fashion, skincare, high-end retail. The kind of brand you see in duty-free shops at every airport in the world. Brandon owned 90.2% of it. He'd acquired it 18 months ago through a shell company. Quietly. Surgically. Almost no one at Pinnacle knew who the real owner was. Not the executives, not the board members, and certainly not the CEO's wife. This morning, Brandon was flying to New York for a routine board vote. Nothing dramatic, just quarterly projections and a few operational tweaks. He packed light, 1 carry-on, his laptop, a book he'd never finish. He dressed exactly the way he always dressed. Hoodie, jeans, sneakers. He didn't want to be recognized. He never did. Now let's talk about the other person in this story. Catherine Ellsworth was already running late. Her chauffeured black Escalade cut through the express lane toward O'Hare. She sat in the back seat with her legs crossed, barking into her phone loud enough for the driver to flinch. I swear, Margaret, the people they let into first class these days, it's like flying Greyhound with a champagne glass. She laughed at her own joke. The driver didn't. Catherine was 58, blonde, thin in the way that costs money. She wore a cream Hermes scarf, a tailored ivory coat, and enough diamonds to set off a metal detector from 10 feet away. Her husband was Gerald Ellsworth, CEO of Pinnacle Brands International. Old Philadelphia money. Country clubs, charity galas. The Ellsworths had been on the social register for 3 generations. But here's the thing about Catherine. She didn't earn any of it. Not the name, not the status, not the wealth. She married into it at 24 and spent the next 34 years treating it like a personality. She sat on 3 charity boards, not because she cared about causes, but because the photos looked good on her social media. She tipped poorly. She called waiters sweetie in the tone that means the opposite. She once sent back a $400 bottle of wine because the sommelier looked at her funny. Catherine Ellsworth was the kind of woman who used money the way some people use a baseball bat, to remind everyone around her exactly where they stood. Today she was flying to New York for a Pinnacle-sponsored gala at the Met. Front row seat, custom gown, her name on the donor wall. She had no idea that the man she was about to meet in seat 2A owned every single thing she was proud of. United Airlines, Flight 904. Chicago O'Hare to JFK. Departure, Gate B18. First class cabin, 8 seats. The cabin smelled like fresh leather and warm coffee. Brandon was already seated in 2A. Laptop open, headphones on, invisible by choice. Catherine stepped through the curtain into first class. Her perfume arrived before she did. Heavy, expensive, suffocating. Her eyes swept the cabin like a queen inspecting her court. Then she saw him, and her face changed. Catherine didn't sit down. She stood in the aisle, one hand on her hip, the other clutching her Chanel bag like a weapon. Her eyes locked on Brandon with a look that could curdle milk. "Excuse me." Brandon looked up, removed one earbud. "Yes?" "You're in first class." "I am." "Why?" Brandon blinked. Slowly. The way you blink when someone asks you why the sky is blue. "Because I bought a ticket." Catherine's nostrils flared. She turned to the flight attendant, a young woman named Tanya Brooks, who was standing 3 steps behind, holding a tray of warm towels. "You, come here, right now." Tanya approached carefully. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome to—" "Don't good morning me. Why is this man in first class?" Tanya glanced at Brandon, then back at Catherine. "Ma'am, all passengers in this cabin have confirmed first-class tickets. Mr. Moore is in his assigned—" "I don't care what your little computer says. Look at him! Look at him!" Catherine jabbed her finger toward Brandon like she was pointing at a cockroach on the floor. "Does that look like first class to you?" The cabin went quiet. Not regular quiet, the kind of quiet where people stop chewing, stop breathing, stop pretending to read their magazines. Brandon said nothing. He placed his earbud back in and returned to his laptop screen. That made Catherine angrier. "Don't you ignore me! I am talking to you!" She grabbed her Chanel bag, $50,000 of quilted black lambskin, and slammed it down onto the empty seat next to Brandon. Seat 2B, her assigned seat. She didn't sit in it. She used it as a shelf. "This seat is for my bag, not for sitting, and certainly not for sitting next to someone like you." Then she did something that made Tanya's stomach drop. Catherine lifted her right foot, red-soled Louboutin, freshly polished, and planted it directly on Brandon's armrest. Her stiletto heel pressed into the leather like she was grinding out a cigarette. "I need you to understand something, sweetheart." Her voice dripped with venom. "You are in my space, my air, My section of this plane, and I want you gone. Brandon looked at the shoe on his armrest. Then he looked at Catherine. His expression hadn't changed. Not once. Ma'am, I'd appreciate it if you removed your foot from my armrest. Or what? Catherine leaned in closer, close enough for Brandon to smell the perfume radiating off her neck. Heavy, choking, like flowers rotting in a vase. She didn't remove her foot. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small crystal bottle of perfume. Without a word, she sprayed it. 2, 3, 4 pumps, directly into the air around Brandon's face. The mist settled on his hoodie, on his laptop screen, on the back of his hands. Catherine fanned the air dramatically, wrinkling her nose like she'd just walked past a dumpster. Sorry, I'm allergic to certain smells. She looked at Brandon when she said it. Right in his eyes, no subtlety, no attempt to hide what she meant. A woman in row 3 gasped. Audibly, Brandon closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. When he opened them, his face was still calm, still steady, like a man counting to 10 inside a burning room. He wiped the perfume mist off his laptop screen with his sleeve and said nothing. Catherine took his silence as victory. She snapped her fingers in the air, sharp, loud, like cracking a whip. Once, twice, 3 times. Flight attendant! Flight attendant! Tanya was already there. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice stayed professional. Ma'am, how can I help? You can help by doing your job. Remove this man from first class. I paid $14,000 for this ticket. I did not pay $14,000 to sit next to this. She gestured at Brandon the way someone gestures at trash that hasn't been taken out. Ma'am, I'm not authorized to move a passenger who has a valid... Then get me someone who is authorized. Get me the captain. Get me the CEO of this airline. I don't care. Just get this thing out of my sight. She called him a thing. Not man, not person, not even him. A thing. Tanya swallowed hard. Ma'am, I can offer you a different seat if you'd prefer. I don't want a different seat. I want him in a different cabin. He can go sit in economy where he belongs. He'd probably be more comfortable back there with his own kind anyway. The white businessman across the aisle, mid-50s, silver hair, reading glasses, lowered his newspaper. He'd been listening silently the whole time. Ma'am, he said quietly, you're being unreasonable. The man hasn't done anything wrong. Catherine spun on him like a rattlesnake. Did anyone ask you? Mind your own business before I have you moved too. The businessman raised both hands and leaned back. But he didn't look away. His jaw was tight. Catherine turned back to Brandon. She was breathing hard now, her chest heaving under her ivory coat. Her cheeks were flushed pink, not from embarrassment, but from rage. You think you can just sit there? You think if you ignore me, I'll go away? Brandon finally spoke, calm, quiet, almost gentle. Ma'am, I have my boarding pass right here. This is my seat. I'm not going anywhere. Wrong answer. Catherine snatched her phone from her coat pocket. She held it up, camera aimed directly at Brandon's face. The shutter sound clicked 3 times. Smile, honey. I'm posting this to every social media account I have. Let everyone see what kind of people they're putting in first class these days. She tapped her screen, narrating out loud as she typed. First class on United. Look who's sitting next to me. This is what $14,000 gets you now. Disgusting. She said that last word looking directly into Brandon's eyes. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he looked back at his laptop and continued typing. That's when Catherine realized ignoring her was worse than fighting her. She couldn't stand it. "Oh, so you're educated now? You can type? Probably Googling how you got that ticket, because we both know you didn't pay for it." Nothing. What, some charity upgrade? Frequent flyer miles from your baby mama? Nothing. Brandon's fingers moved across the keyboard. Steady. Rhythmic. Like she wasn't even there. Catherine's eye twitched. It was at this moment that Officer Ray Sutton stood up from seat 4C. Sutton was an air marshal. Plain clothes, badge under his jacket. He'd been watching the entire exchange with growing concern, waiting to see if the crew could resolve it. They couldn't. "Ma'am." Sutton's voice was deep, controlled, and carried the unmistakable weight of authority. "I need you to take your seat and lower your voice." Catherine's entire demeanor changed. Instantly, like flipping a switch. The rage vanished. The sneer disappeared. Her eyes went wide and glassy. Her lower lip started trembling. She pressed one hand to her chest, and the other reached out toward Sutton like a drowning woman. "Oh, thank God. Officer, this man has been threatening me since I boarded. I don't feel safe. He's been staring at me, making comments. I think he might be dangerous." She manufactured tears in under 2 seconds. Real tears. Sliding down her cheeks, her voice cracked perfectly on the word dangerous. It was a performance. Oscar-worthy. Sutton's face didn't change. He'd seen every second of what actually happened. But protocol is protocol. He turned to Brandon. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass and identification?" Brandon reached into his hoodie pocket, pulled out both, and handed them over without a word. No attitude, no resistance, no sigh. Sutton examined them, looked at the seat number, looked at Brandon, looked at the seat. Everything matched. He handed them back. "Thank you, sir. Everything's in order." Then he turned to Catherine. "Ma'am, this gentleman has a valid first-class ticket and is seated in his assigned seat. He has not threatened you. He has not raised his voice. I've been observing this situation since you boarded, and I'm going to ask you one more time. Please take your seat." Catherine's fake tears dried up faster than they'd appeared. "This is discrimination," she hissed. "Against me. I will have every single one of you fired. Every single one." The intercom crackled. Captain James Whitfield's voice filled the cabin, calm, professional, and tired. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay due to a cabin disruption. We appreciate your patience and expect to be underway shortly." Every passenger on that plane now knew exactly what was happening, and at least 4 of them were already recording. Catherine didn't sit down. She couldn't. Sitting down meant losing, and Catherine Ellsworth had never lost anything in her life, because she'd never been in a fight that money couldn't win. She pulled out her phone again. This time, she didn't take photos. She called her husband. On speaker, full volume, in the middle of first class, surrounded by passengers who were already recording, Catherine Ellsworth dialed Gerald Ellsworth, CEO of Pinnacle Brands International, and let the whole cabin hear every word. The phone rang twice. "Catherine, I'm in a meeting." "Gerald, listen to me." Her voice was shaking, not from fear, from fury. "They are forcing me to sit next to a black man in first class. He stinks, Gerald. He's wearing a hoodie. And nobody on this plane will do anything about it." Silence on the other end. Then a careful exhale. "Catherine, please lower your voice and just—" "Don't you dare tell me to lower my voice. I am your wife. I am the wife of the CEO of a $4 billion company. And I am being treated like trash on this airplane because of some thug in a sweatshirt." She said that word, thug, loud enough for every passenger to hear, loud enough for every phone recording to capture, loud enough for Brandon Moore, sitting 4 feet away, to feel it land like a slap. Gerald's voice came through tight, strained. "Catherine, please, just sit down. I'll call the airline after." She hung up on him, mid-sentence. Didn't even say goodbye. Then she turned back to Brandon. "That was my husband, Gerald Ellsworth, CEO of Pinnacle Brands. Maybe you've heard of it? Probably not. It's a luxury brand. Not exactly your demographic." Brandon didn't look up. His fingers hadn't stopped moving on his keyboard. Not once during the entire phone call. That calm was killing Catherine. It was eating her alive from the inside. She needed a reaction, any reaction, a flinch, a raised voice, a clenched fist, something she could point to and say, "See, he's dangerous." She got nothing. So she escalated. Catherine reached down and grabbed Brandon's laptop bag from the floor beside his seat. It was a simple black messenger bag. No logo, no brand. Inside it was a laptop charger, 2 folders of financial documents, and a leather notebook Brandon had carried since business school. She picked it up and threw it into the aisle. Not dropped, not nudged, threw. The bag hit the carpet with a heavy thud. The folders spilled open, papers scattered across the aisle like leaves in a windstorm. "Oops," Catherine said, smiling, that thin, poisonous smile that never reaches the eyes. Brandon looked at his bag on the floor, at the papers spread across the aisle, at 15 years of handwritten notes splayed open for strangers to step on. He still didn't raise his voice. "Ma'am, you just threw my personal property." "Prove it." Catherine crossed her arms. "I didn't touch anything. It fell." Then she reached for the glass of water sitting on Brandon's tray table. Ice water. Condensation dripping down the sides. She picked it up, looked at it, looked at Brandon, and poured it, slowly, deliberately, right onto his tray table. The water spread across the surface, soaking a napkin, dripping onto the armrest, pooling against the edge of his laptop. "Oh no." Her voice was flat, dead, mocking. "My hand slipped. Butterfingers." She wiggled her fingers in his face and grinned. Tanya rushed over with napkins. Her hands were trembling. Her eyes were red. She'd been holding back tears for the last 10 minutes. "Sir, I am so sorry. Let me clean this up." "It's all right," Brandon said. He took the napkins from Tanya and wiped his tray table himself. "It's not your fault." He said it to Tanya, but his eyes were on Catherine. For the first time in this entire confrontation, something shifted in Brandon's expression. Not anger, not hurt. Something deeper, something heavier. Disappointment. Like he'd seen this before, 100 times, 1,000 times. In boardrooms and traffic stops and hotel lobbies and restaurants where the hostess seats you by the kitchen. Like this wasn't new. This was just Tuesday. And that is what makes this so much worse. Catherine didn't notice the shift. She was too busy enjoying herself. She turned to the other first-class passengers with her arms spread wide, performing for an audience that wanted nothing to do with her. Can you believe this? Am I the only one who sees what's happening here? They'll let anyone into first class now. Next thing you know, they'll be bringing dogs in here too. Oh, wait. She looked at Brandon. They already did. She compared him to a dog, on camera, in front of witnesses, with an air marshal standing 6 feet away. The Black family in row 4, a mother, a father, and their 8-year-old son, sat frozen. The mother's hand was pressed over her son's ear. Her other hand gripped her husband's wrist so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The father stared straight ahead. His jaw was clenched so hard you could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. The white businessman across the aisle had his phone out now, recording. He spoke clearly into the camera. For the record, it is 11:14 a.m. on United Flight 904. The woman in seat 2B has been the sole aggressor since boarding. The man in 2A has not raised his voice once. A college-aged woman 2 rows back was already tweeting. Her first clip, 11 seconds long, had been posted 4 minutes ago. It already had 12,000 views. The hashtag wrote itself. Hashtag First Class Racism. Denise Coleman sat in 3A, silent, still. The phone angled low against her knee, recording everything. She hadn't said a word since boarding, hadn't made eye contact with Brandon once. To every passenger around her, she was just another traveler watching the chaos unfold. Nobody knew she was Brandon's executive assistant. Nobody knew the footage on her phone would eventually be played in a corporate boardroom. But Catherine wasn't done. She was never done. She stepped into the aisle, physically blocked the drink cart, stood with her feet planted wide and her chin raised high and her Hermes scarf trailing behind her like a battle flag. And she delivered her ultimatum. I want everyone on this plane to hear me. Everyone. She was loud enough for economy to hear, loud enough for the cockpit to hear. My husband is Gerald Ellsworth, CEO of Pinnacle Brands International, a $4 billion company. I sit on 3 charity boards. I have dined with senators. I have been to the White House. She jabbed her finger at Brandon. And I will never sit next to this. Not today, not ever. I will have this airline shut down. I will have every employee on this plane terminated. And if you don't remove this man in the next 60 seconds, I will call Pinnacle's legal team and we will own this airline by Friday. She was screaming by the end, veins visible on her neck, spit flying. Her Hermes scarf had slipped off one shoulder, but she didn't notice. The cabin was dead silent. 36,000 feet below, the world kept spinning. Up here, time had stopped. Brandon sat perfectly still through the entire speech. His laptop was closed now. His hands rested on his thighs. His eyes were fixed on Catherine with an expression that was impossible to read. But underneath the tray table, where nobody could see, his phone screen had just lit up. A text from Denise Coleman. She doesn't know, does she? Brandon typed back 3 letters. Nah. Then he locked his phone and slipped it back into his hoodie pocket. He didn't smile this time. He looked at Catherine the way a chess player looks at an opponent who just moved their queen into checkmate. Their own checkmate. Catherine had just screamed the name Pinnacle Brands International into a cabin full of recording phones. She had attached her husband's title, his company, and his reputation to every vile word she'd spoken in the last 30 minutes. She thought she was playing her strongest card. She had no idea she'd just handed Brandon Moore the match. And the cabin didn't know it yet. Tanya didn't know it. Sutton didn't know it. The businessman with the recording didn't know it. The college girl with the tweet didn't know it. But Denise knew, and Brandon knew. The next 4 words out of his mouth would change Catherine Ellsworth's life forever. He just hadn't said them yet. Brandon stood up, not fast, not dramatic. He just rose, slowly, like a man who had all the time in the world, like a man who had been sitting in a burning building and finally decided it was time to walk out the front door. He straightened his hoodie, brushed a wrinkle off his sleeve, and for the first time since Catherine Ellsworth had stepped onto this plane, he gave her his full, undivided attention. The cabin held its breath. "Pinnacle Brands," Brandon said. His voice was low, measured, almost conversational. $4 billion. That's the company you just mentioned, right? Catherine blinked. Something in his tone made her step back half an inch. She didn't know why. "Yes, that's my husband's company. And when he hears about your husband's company," Brandon repeated the words slowly, tasting them, rolling them around like a sommelier examining a wine he already knew was corked. "Right." He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his phone. Cracked screen. No case. The same phone he'd been scrolling emails on since 5:45 that morning. "You said you wanted to call Pinnacle's people. You said you'd own this airline by Friday." He looked at her, calm, direct, almost kind. "You don't need to make that call, ma'am." He held up the phone. "I'll make it for you." Catherine's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No words came out. Brandon dialed. 1 tap. Speed dial. He didn't need to look up the number. He put the phone on speaker and held it between them like a mirror. The cabin was so quiet you could hear the engines humming 30,000 feet below. 2 rings. "Brandon? I was just reviewing the Q3 projections for tomorrow's—" "Neil, change of plans." Neil Patterson, Chairman of the Board of Directors, Pinnacle Brands International. His voice came through the speaker crystal clear. Every passenger within 10 feet could hear every syllable. "I need an emergency board session tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp." A pause. "Emergency? What happened?" "Full restructuring review, executive leadership, starting with the CEO position." Another pause. Longer this time. "The CEO? Gerald Ellsworth? Brandon, are you sure?" "I'm sure." Brandon's voice didn't waver, didn't rise, didn't crack. It was the voice of a man who had made billion-dollar decisions before breakfast and slept 8 hours that same night. "As the holder of 90.2% of Pinnacle Brands International, I'm formally requesting this session. Have legal prepare the paperwork tonight." 90.2%. Understood. I'll send the notices within the hour. "Thank you, Neil." Brandon ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and looked at Catherine. She hadn't moved. Her Louboutin heels were rooted to the cabin floor like they'd been nailed there. Her Chanel bag sat on the seat behind her, forgotten. Her Hermes scarf hung off one shoulder, dragging against the armrest. Her mouth was open, slightly, like someone had pressed pause in the middle of a screen. Because Catherine Ellsworth had just heard 3 things that broke her brain. 1. The name Brandon. The name her husband whispered at night when he thought she wasn't listening. The name that made Gerald's hands shake when it came up at dinner parties. The invisible shareholder. the ghost. The man behind the curtain who owned the company but never showed his face. 2. 90.2%. Not a minority stake, not a board seat, 90.2%. Gerald owned 8. The rest of the board combined owned less than 2. This man in the faded hoodie and cracked phone, owned everything. 3. Starting with the CEO position. Gerald. Her Gerald. The man whose name she'd been screaming like a weapon for the last 30 minutes. His job was now on the chopping block. Because of her. Catherine's vision blurred. The cabin lights seemed to tilt. The overhead bins stretched and warped. Tanya's voice, "Ma'am? Ma'am, are you all right?" sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a swimming pool. Catherine looked at Brandon, the man she had sprayed with perfume, the man whose bag she had thrown across the aisle, the man whose water she had poured out like he was nothing, the man she had called disgusting, an animal, a dog, a thing. That man owned her house, her car, her credit cards, her husband's salary, her charity board seats, her gala invitations, her country club membership, her entire identity. Every single thing Catherine Ellsworth had, every diamond, every designer bag, every first-class ticket she'd ever clutched like a shield, existed because of the company this man held in the palm of his hand. And she had just spent 30 minutes trying to destroy him. The realization didn't come slowly. It came all at once, like a wall of water, like a building falling, like the ground opening beneath your feet and there's nothing to grab. Catherine's knees buckled, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed right there in the aisle of first class. Her body crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Her Hermes scarf pooled around her head like a surrender flag. Her Louboutin heel caught the edge of the seat and snapped clean off. She was out cold before she hit the carpet. Tanya dropped to her knees beside Catherine, pressing 2 fingers to her neck, reaching for smelling salts with the other hand. Sutton moved in, checking her pulse, calling for the onboard medical kit. Passengers stood up in their seats, phones still recording, mouths open. And Brandon Moore, the man who owned 90.2% of a $4.8 billion empire, looked down at the woman who had tried to have him thrown off the plane. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked Tanya. His voice was soft, genuinely concerned. No satisfaction, no smugness, no revenge in his eyes. Just a man asking if another human being was all right. Tanya looked up at him. Her eyes were wet. "I think so, sir." Brandon nodded, sat back down in seat 2A, opened his laptop, and went back to work. Catherine came back to consciousness the way drowning people come back to air, gasping, choking, clawing at nothing. Her eyes flew open. The overhead lights of first class blurred above her like fluorescent moons. Tanya was kneeling beside her, holding smelling salts. Sutton had 2 fingers on her wrist, counting her pulse. "Ma'am, can you hear me? You fainted. Just breathe." Catherine breathed. Once. Twice. Then her eyes focused, and she saw him, Brandon Moore, sitting in 2A, laptop open, typing, like nothing had happened. Everything came flooding back. The phone call, Neil Patterson's voice, 90.2%, emergency board session, CEO position. Catherine scrambled up from the floor. Her knees hit the carpet hard. Her Hermes scarf was tangled around her neck. One Louboutin was missing. The heel had snapped off when she fell. She didn't notice. She didn't care. She crawled toward Brandon's seat, actually crawled, hands and knees, in first class, on a plane full of people who were still recording. "Mr. Moore." Her voice was wrecked, shredded, like someone had taken sandpaper to her vocal cords. "Mr. Moore, please, please. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Brandon stopped typing. He looked at her. Not down at her. He didn't need to. She had already put herself on the ground. "What didn't you know, ma'am?" "Who you are. I didn't... If I had known..." "If you had known." Brandon let the words hang in the air like smoke. "If you had known who I was, you wouldn't have done what you did. That's what you're saying?" "Yes, yes, I would never..." "But you did." Brandon's voice was quiet, not angry, not cold. Worse than both. Sad. "You did all of it. The perfume, the bag, the water, the names. You did every single one of those things. You just thought I was nobody when you did them." Catherine's face crumbled. Tears, real ones this time, streamed down her cheeks, cutting rivers through her foundation. "Please, my husband, Gerald, he's a good man. This was my fault. Don't punish him for..." "Your husband is a separate conversation, Mrs. Ellsworth." "I'll apologize. Publicly. I'll do anything. She reached for his arm. Her fingers grasped at his sleeve like a lifeline. Brandon pulled back. Gently, but firmly. "Ma'am, please get up off the floor." Catherine didn't move. She stayed on her knees, mascara running, scarf dragging, one shoe broken. The woman who had walked onto this plane like she owned the sky was now kneeling in the aisle like she was begging for her life. Because she was. Brandon looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, stepped carefully around her, and walked toward the front of the cabin without looking back. Denise fell into step behind him. Silent, professional, phone in her pocket. Recording saved. Tanya helped Catherine back into her seat. Catherine sat slumped against the window, staring at nothing. Her Chanel bag sat on the seat beside her, untouched. It looked obscene now. A $50,000 prop in a tragedy she had written herself. The plane landed at JFK 43 minutes later. Catherine didn't move when the seatbelt sign turned off. She didn't reach for her bag. She didn't fix her hair. She just sat there, hollow, while every other passenger filed past her. Some of them looked at her. Most didn't. The jet bridge door opened, and the real world rushed in. 2 uniformed police officers stood at the gate. Behind them, an airline security supervisor with a clipboard. Tanya had radioed ahead. Sutton had filed his federal incident report mid-flight. The airline's ground team had been briefed before the wheels touched tarmac. Catherine was escorted off the plane last. Not as a VIP. Not as the wife of a CEO. As the subject of a federal disturbance investigation. A female officer took her elbow, not rough, but not gentle either, and guided her through a side corridor away from the terminal. Catherine went quietly. She had no fight left. Brandon walked through the terminal at his usual pace, hoodie up, hands in pockets, invisible again. Denise walked beside him, swiping through her tablet. The tweet from the college girl. 200,000 views, still climbing. Hashtag first-class racism is trending in New York and Chicago. Brandon nodded. Didn't slow down. And Gerald? He's called 4 times in the last 20 minutes, left 2 voicemails. He sounds like he's going to throw up. Brandon stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the JFK arrivals hall, surrounded by thousands of strangers who had no idea they were standing next to the man who owned one of the biggest luxury brands on the planet. "Call him back," Brandon said. Denise dialed. Gerald picked up before the first ring finished. "Mr. Moore." Gerald's voice was barely a whisper, the voice of a man watching his house burn from the driveway. "Mr. Moore, my wife, she doesn't represent the company. She has personal issues. She's been under stress and—" "Gerald." Brandon's voice was even, flat, final. "Your wife stood in front of a cabin full of passengers and screamed your name, your title, and your company's name while racially abusing a fellow passenger. She invoked Pinnacle brands while calling a man a dog. That's not personal. That is the company." Silence. "The board meets at 8 a.m. tomorrow. I suggest you bring a lawyer." Brandon hung up. He slid the phone back into his hoodie pocket, pulled his hood up, and walked toward the exit. Behind him, on 1,000 phones across the country, the video was still spreading. 8 a.m., Manhattan. Pinnacle Brands headquarters, 44th floor. 12 leather chairs surrounded a mahogany table. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the New York skyline. The boardroom smelled like fresh coffee and fear. Neil Patterson sat at the head. 71, silver hair, steel glasses, 9 years as chairman. His hands were shaking this morning, because for the first time in Pinnacle's history, the majority shareholder was in the room. Brandon walked in at 7:58, charcoal suit, no tie, same cracked phone in his breast pocket. Denise followed, laptop bag, 2 USB drives, a stack of documents 3 inches thick. The board members stared. Most had never seen Brandon Moore in person. For 18 months he'd been a name on a ledger, a wire transfer. Some had doubted he was real. He was real, and he was not smiling. "Thank you for convening on short notice," Brandon said. "I'll keep this efficient." Denise connected her laptop to the boardroom screen. Catherine's face appeared, mouth open, finger jabbing, Hermes scarf flying. The video played. All of it. The perfume spray, the thrown bag, the water poured, the snapping fingers. Thug. Animal. Dog. The ultimatum. Pinnacle's name screamed over and over like a battering ram. Nobody moved. One board member pressed her hand over her mouth. Another closed his eyes. Denise clicked again. The college student's tweet, now at 4.2 million views. Hashtag First Class Racism had trended #1 nationally for 6 hours. CNN ran a segment at 11 p.m. The New York Times had a piece going live at 9. Brandon let the numbers sit for 10 seconds. Mrs. Ellsworth identified herself publicly as the wife of Pinnacle's CEO. She used this company's name as leverage while engaging in documented racial harassment. That makes this a company matter. He looked around the table. 3 actions. 1. Immediate removal of Gerald Ellsworth as CEO. Catastrophic reputational liability and failure of leadership judgment. 2. A full independent diversity and inclusion audit. 3. A public statement from this board condemning the behavior and outlining Pinnacle's commitment to change. Gerald sat at the far end, suit pressed, eyes red, aged 10 years in 12 hours. His lawyer sat beside him, silent. "Mr. Moore, my wife's actions were her own. They don't reflect Gerald." Brandon's voice was almost gentle. "Your wife screamed this company's name while calling me a dog. On camera. 4 million people have seen it. Tomorrow, it'll be 10 million. The question isn't whether her actions reflect the company. The question is whether the company will pretend they don't. Gerald's lawyer touched his arm. He stopped talking. The vote was unanimous, 12-0. Gerald Ellsworth was removed as CEO, effective immediately. Corporate cards deactivated before the elevator. Parking access revoked before the lobby. Nameplate removed before the sidewalk. He stood on 6th Avenue, September sun, briefcase in hand, phone buzzing with calls he'd never answer. Sandra Willis published first. New York Times above the fold. CEO's wife tried to remove black man from first class. He owned 90% of her husband's company. Shared 800,000 times in 4 hours. CNN ran a 2-hour special. MSNBC dedicated an evening panel. Social media was merciless. Catherine's curated charity photos were reposted with new captions. Her Instagram went private, then deleted. The charity boards moved fast. Children's Literacy Foundation dropped her in 18 hours. Metropolitan Arts Council followed in 24. The Women's Health Alliance released 2 sentences. We thank Catherine Ellsworth for her past service. Her involvement has concluded. Her Greenwich Country Club paused her membership. Everyone knew that pause was permanent. The legal consequences followed. The airline banned Catherine for life, every carrier, every route. Her name was flagged in the federal database pending assault investigation. Brandon's legal team filed a civil suit within 72 hours. 3 counts. Assault, throwing his property. Defamation, the false threat claim. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Sustained racial harassment in a confined space. Catherine settled 4 weeks later. Financial terms sealed. Non-financial terms public. 500 hours of community service with civil rights organizations. A formal written apology, reviewed by Brandon's legal team. Mandatory racial sensitivity education. The apology was published on a Tuesday. 2 paragraphs. It sounded like a lawyer wrote it, because a lawyer did. But the real headline that week wasn't the apology. Brandon Moore had appointed a new CEO. Her name was Valerie Adams. 51. Black. 20-year Pinnacle veteran. Started as a regional sales coordinator, rose to senior vice president of global operations. Passed over for CEO 3 times. Each time for someone with less experience, fewer results, and a different skin color. Not anymore. Valerie's first quarterly report showed a 14% stock increase. Consumer sentiment hit a 5-year high. 3 major retail partners who'd been reconsidering their contracts reversed course and expanded. Doing the right thing turned out to be good business. Brandon donated every dollar of Catherine's settlement to the Equal Justice Initiative. No announcement, no social media post. A clerk at the EJI noticed the wire transfer and called Denise to confirm it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't. So where are they now? Brandon Moore is still Brandon Moore. He still flies commercial, still wears the hoodie, still carries the cracked screen phone he's had for 3 years. He still eats oatmeal standing up at 6 in the morning. He still doesn't do interviews, still doesn't post on social media, still doesn't show up on magazine covers or richest people lists, because he asks to be removed every time someone tries. Last month, he flew first class from New York to Los Angeles. He sat in 3A. Hoodie, headphones, laptop open. The woman next to him asked if he wanted her extra blanket. He said thank you. They talked about nothing for 20 minutes, and then both fell asleep before takeoff. Nobody on that plane knew who he was. That's exactly how he likes it. Valerie Adams is thriving. In her first year as CEO, Pinnacle Brands posted its highest revenue in company history. She restructured the executive team, 40% women, 30% people of color. She launched a mentorship pipeline that connected entry-level employees with senior leadership. She did a profile with Forbes. The headline read, "The woman who was passed over 3 times just built the most profitable year in Pinnacle history." When asked about Brandon Moore in that interview, Valerie paused for a long time. Then she said, "He didn't give me this job because of what happened on that plane. He gave me this job because I earned it 20 years ago. He's just the first person who bothered to notice." Tanya Brooks received a formal commendation from United Airlines for her professionalism during the incident. She was offered a promotion to lead cabin crew on international routes. She accepted. On her first transatlantic flight, she taped a small note inside her crew locker. It read, "Every passenger is a person first." The college student, the one who tweeted the 11-second clip, saw her video reach 45 million views. She received internship offers from 3 media companies before the week was over. She chose one. She's now a junior producer at a documentary studio in Brooklyn. Her first project? A short film about racial bias in commercial aviation. Officer Ray Sutton continued his work as a federal air marshal. He was never publicly identified. He preferred it that way. But in his incident report, the one filed with the FAA, he wrote a single sentence in the additional comments section that was later quoted in the New York Times article. "In 22 years of federal service, I have never witnessed a passenger treat another human being with that level of sustained cruelty." Gerald Ellsworth never recovered. No Fortune 500 company would touch him. No board would seat him. His name had become shorthand for something no executive wanted to be associated with. He sold the house in Greenwich for a loss, moved to a rental in Connecticut. He works as a private consultant now, a polite word for a man no one calls. He and Catherine divorced 7 months after the incident. The proceedings were quiet. There was nothing left to fight over. Catherine Ellsworth finished her 500 hours of community service at a civil rights legal clinic in Newark. On her last day, one of the staff attorneys asked her if she'd learned anything. Catherine stared at the floor for a long time. Then she said, "I learned that I never once thought about what it felt like to be him." She lives in a small apartment in suburban New Jersey now. She works retail. She doesn't fly anymore, not because of the ban, but because she can't afford it. The Chanel bag is in a closet somewhere. She hasn't touched it since. The diamonds are gone. The Hermes scarves are gone. The Louboutins are gone. The charity boards, the country club, the gala invitations, the front row seats, all gone. Every single thing she lost can be traced back to one moment, one sentence, one decision to treat a stranger like garbage because she thought he was nobody. He wasn't nobody. But that's not the point. The point is, it shouldn't matter if he was. So let me ask you, if you were sitting in that cabin, row 3, row 4, anywhere on that plane, would you have spoken up? Or would you have looked away? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear it. I want to hear your story. If this one hit you in the chest, smash that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because next week's story, even wilder than this one. I promise you that. And remember this. Carry it with you. Respect is not something you owe only to people who can destroy you. If your kindness depends on someone's status, It was never kindness at all.